told you I was on your side. I told you I would never hide. So you can put your hand in mine, 'cause I'll be keeping by your side. I'll love you till the stars turn cold, and I'll love you like this ring I hold. Yes, around it goes, a circle never knows the end of the line. So you will find with our love, 'cause this love is a band of gold.
Hello and welcome to the Goldberry Artisans Podcast. This is a podcast mostly about knitting, sometimes some other crafts sneak their way in, and about learning as you go and being okay with not knowing everything and making mistakes. My name is Emily and I'm coming to you from the beautiful state of Maine. So, it is July. Oh my goodness, almost August. This is crazy. But today I have one finished object to talk about, 3 works in progress, and 1 cross-stitching project. I guess I can start with cross-stitch since it's different. Excuse me. In the beginning of this month, well, and basically all throughout July, we have been having high humidity and high temperatures, and there was, especially the week of the 4th of July, it was crazy hot and I didn't feel like knitting, but I wanted to be making something, so I started a cross-stitching project. I don't remember, I got this pattern from an Etsy shop, and I will put the information on the screen and in the show notes, but it's going to say, "Not all those who wander are lost," which is a Tolkien quote. And I'm working on the mountains and the water down here. So yeah, it's just been a fun, quick project. Most of this was done over just a couple of days. So I haven't worked on it lately, but it's been fun to have a different craft, something else to work on. Especially when it's really hot. Well, so that's my cross-stitching. I was definitely inspired by Sarah of the Dabbling Shepherdess. I loved her, it's called Stitch Mania. I think whatever it's called, in May, when people will start a different cross-stitching project, like every day in May. And yeah, so Sarah did some floss tube videos about all of her cross-stitching projects, and that inspired me to pick mine up. I have a finished object. It only took like a week to fully dry and finish blocking because of all this humidity, but I have completed my Nanilchik Swan Show. I hope I'm saying that right. Don't remember. I forgot to look it up. Yes, I love this. I haven't been able to wear it because it's been too hot, but I have tried it on a couple of times. It's nice and soft. It's definitely big. Like, the pattern, I think, only has 2 sizes, and I knit the smaller of the 2 sizes, and I am very glad I did. At one point, I debated about making the bigger size because I tend to wear oversized sweaters more, but I'm very glad I went with the smaller size because it's already oversized. So, when I was a little girl, I loved wearing ponchos. I had a purple cable-y one that my grandmother had knit for me, and I wore that all the time. But they're just not practical, right? Like, for me right now, I like to be able to use my arms. That's why I like shawls. I can drape them around and still use my arms, but that's why I loved this pattern so much, because it has sleeves. So you can get the look of a poncho, but then you actually have sleeves so your arms are not trapped inside the poncho. I love Caitlin Hunter's patterns. Oh my goodness. I was working on this. I have another one on the needles, and I have plans to make another one. I have the yarn ready for it. So, something that I love about her patterns is just, I love the color work. And I love color work anyway, and I love traditional color work, but there's something kind of more freeing about Caitlin's color work. She definitely incorporates traditional motifs, but in so many of her pattern photos and in the photos that she features on her project, like on the pattern page on Ravelry that other people have made, you can see a lot of people will go, some people will go really bold with high contrast, and some people will go with more subtle colors. Which is really cool to see how you can take color work and use a whole bunch of different kinds of colors. Because in traditional color work, you want high contrast so that you can see what's going on in the stitch pattern. But with her patterns, you can go bold or you can go subtle, and either way, you can still see the color work and it's gorgeous. Like an example of that would be even Sue and Chelsea of Legacy Knits, of the Legacy Knits podcast. They're hosting a colorwork sweater knit along this summer, and both of them are knitting the Tecumseh by Caitlin Hunter. And Sue is going with a brighter contrast, like she's got gray and white and then a lime green. And then Chelsea has like more of a muted, like a taupe, pinky, brownie color, I can't remember exactly, and then like a cream color. So hers is a lower contrast, but it's still, you can still see the color work and it's still gorgeous. So that is something that I really love about her patterns. They're also very well written, and something, I hadn't thought of this until I was knitting her patterns and then went to knit another pattern, her formatting. Because I look at a lot of my patterns on my phone. For this one, I printed out the charts, but I'll use the written directions and I'll look it up on my phone. And Caitlin Hunter's pattern, she does things in 2 columns, so it's much easier to actually zoom in on the part I want to read, whereas some other patterns that I've used since then are just all across the page, which makes it harder to read. Like, either have to be zoomed out or I can zoom in, but then I have to keep scroll to the end of the line and then go back to the beginning of the next line. So that's a small thing, but I really like having pattern directions in 2 columns, which I had never really thought about before. I didn't really care, but as someone who doesn't print out most patterns, that is really helpful. Yeah, her patterns are just beautiful and amazing, and everybody's knitting them right now, so I'm not the first one to rave about her patterns. But it's with good reason. If you haven't knit any of her patterns and you don't quite understand what all the hype is about, I think it's just because they're color work, but it's simple color work. There are some rounds where you're working with 3 colors at once, which can be a little tricky to get the hang of, but it's fairly simple color work, and she just has really good, I don't know, just a good sense of style and some different variety in how your sweaters look. And she tends to write patterns to have a lot of positive ease, which is how I like my sweaters in general. So that's really nice to have that already built into the pattern. I don't need to figure it out, and I can easily look at the pattern photos and see kind of what it will look like on me, not just have to imagine it with positive ease, but to be able to look and see the amount of ease that is in the pattern photos. So yes, that is my Nino Chick Swan Show. I don't remember all the yarns. I talked about them last time. I inherited them. Most of them are DK weight, except for this teal is a sport weight. I know the maroon I bought from Knit Picks. I don't remember all the other ones. But you can look at my project page on Ravelry. I don't always include a lot of notes in my project pages, but I do include the yarns that I used and the needles that I used. I forgot I had this one. I technically have 4 works in progress, I guess. But this is super long term. I have started the Persian Dreams blanket. And by started, I mean completed 1 hexagon and got like 10 rounds into another one. But this is a massive blanket made out of colorwork hexagons, some of which, like, I'll knit this chart, I don't remember how many times, and then there's a few other charts that you'll knit different amounts of times. But it definitely requires a lot of concentration. You're only ever using 2 colors at a time, but it changes the whole way up and you're doing increases. And then it's hard to tell because the edges are all curling in, but it is a hexagon. And some of them will have border stitches around them. This one does not. But basically you knit it and then you put it onto waste yarn. You put all the stitches onto waste yarn, and then all of the hexagons will be grafted together. This is like a super long term, I don't even know how many years it will take me project. But it's nice because sometimes if all of my projects are at a point where it's really easy knitting, and then sometimes I want something a little more complicated, if just because I do, it's what I feel like knitting. So I think this will be a good option to pull out when I want something a little bit more complicated, something that will engage my brain a little bit more. So yes, I will definitely not pull it out every podcast episode and be like, oh look, I knit 3 more rounds on this. But I will kind of keep talking about it as I finish the hexagons. That's something I've been thinking about lately, is like, what kinds of knitting I want. Because right now it's over summer vacation, I'm not taking any classes. I took one summer class, but it's done now. And so I have the brain space to knit more complicated things, which I think is why I've been loving Caitlin Hunter's patterns, is because I want to be making like sweaters and garments right now. But I also want something that is a little more challenging, engages my brain more, and so I am gravitating towards her patterns because of all the color work. So, but then there's other times when I want just plain stockinette or garter stitch, especially during the school year. But even one of my later works in progress, right now I'm at a point where it's just straight stockinette stitch for a while, and it kind of makes me less likely to pull it out unless I'm reading. But if I'm just sitting, or if I'm watching something or whatever, I don't, as beautiful as it is and as much as I love it, it's not what I pull out, because it's kind of boring to knit on if that's all I'm doing. The saving grace is that it's with hand-dyed yarns. I guess I'll just talk about it. So sometimes I do want something that's easy to knit, and I look at patterns and I see patterns and they're like just mostly stockinette, very basic, and I love how they look, but I know that I'm not going to enjoy making that as much as I like to make something more complicated. Like last time, I didn't bring it out with me. Shoot. Last time I talked about my Georgetown cardigan by Hannah Fettig, and how it was worsted weight stockinette stitch sweater, but it felt like a slog to get through the last half of the sweater. But I wore it all the time. I completed it in May, like the end of May, like Memorial Day weekend, and I wore it, and I've worn it a few times, like if it gets cooler in the evenings, I'll wear it, or if it's in the morning, I'll wear it. And I love it. I love having that basic gray simple cardigan, but at the same time it was kind of it just took me forever to knit it because I wasn't overly enjoying the process. So that's why some people are very good about having only one project on the needles, but I like to have a few different projects, because then no matter what I feel like knitting, I have something going for that. I don't always feel the need to cast something on. I already have something. Like I have, like, this will be a long-term, my Persian Dreams will be a long-term project where if I want something complicated, then I can pull that out. And I like to have like a pair of socks on the needles. It's usually a little bit easier to work on, and have a sweater. I just like to have a variety of projects so that whatever I want to work on, I can pull it out. But anyway, I bought this yarn. It's beautiful. This is from On the Round. Rachel had kind of like a beginning of summer sale, and so I grabbed 2 skeins of this yarn. Let me find the tags, because I actually have them. I'm so impressed with myself today. So it's from On the Round. It is her signature sock yarn, which is a superwash merino nylon blend, 80-20 blend, 410 yards per skein. And this is her color Always a Bridesmaid, which when she first posted about it, I fell in love with it and I wanted to buy it, and then she had a sale, and so I get 2 skeins. And it's beautiful. It's like kind of this creamy color, but then it has, oh, the speckles, oh my word. So she's got like hot pink and teal and peach and purple. It is beautiful. And sometimes like 2 or 3 colors of speckles all in the same spot, and it's amazing. And so I was trying to think of something I wanted to knit, because I didn't I could make socks with them, but the yarn is so gorgeous, and I had 2 skeins, so I wanted to make something a little bit bigger. So I went hunting in Ravelry, and I cast on the Belleau, I don't know, pattern by Melissa, blanking on her last name. She's a dandelion girl. But it's a little cropped cardigan with 3/4 length sleeves. It's a top-down raglan construction. So I'm at the point now where it's just stockinette stitch for the rest of the body. And I've divided off for the sleeves already. I don't think I've ever knit a raglan sweater. I don't think I've knit one yet. I've mostly done set and sleeve, like knit in pieces, set and sleeve construction. Or I've done like a yoke, like a colorwork yoke pattern where you knit the body, knit the sleeves, then join it all together, knit the yoke. So this is my first raglan. But what I really liked is that it's 3/4 length sleeves, because I have a lot of shirts and dresses that I wear in the summertime, in the spring and fall, that are like, they're like short sleeves. So I feel like that would be a little awkward to have a short sleeve sweater over top of that, because then the sleeves of my shirt might be longer than the sleeves of the sweater, which just looks a little funny. So I was excited to see that it was a 3/4 length sleeve, and I will be pushing it with yardage, so I didn't do a gauge swatch. I know last time I talked about how I was doing so much better about doing a gauge swatch, but I skipped that part this time. But yeah, so I may not knit it the full length that it calls for in the pattern, and then go back, or I could put it onto like an extra needle or something and then go back and do the sleeves, and then once the sleeves are done I could go back and make it longer if I wanted to, or just bind it off. I don't know, I gotta figure it out. And I'm alternating skeins. I'm being a good knitter, because that's a good idea if you're using hand-dyed yarns, because even if they're from the same dye pot, there will most likely be variation between the 2 skeins, and so it would be obvious when you joined the next skein. So I'm alternating, and that will actually make it easier for the sleeves, because like I said, I'm pushing it for yardage, and so I can the sleeves will be pretty much equal by the time I'm done with the body, and so I can just use 1 skein for each sleeve and just knit until the yarn is gone and then bind off. Well, knit until the yarn is almost gone and then bind off. So I am very excited. I have been loving seeing the speckles come up, and that's like I was saying earlier about how plain stockinette stitch sweaters are just not my thing right now, but because of the yarn, I'm excited to see the yarn, and I love seeing how it works up and what color is coming next that I'm using, and so that's keeping my interest on this sweater instead of having like a stitch pattern or color work or anything. That's what's holding my interest here. And it's in the middle, partly started a row. I promise I ended it at the actual end of a row, not in the middle, but then I was filming the intro for this, my little intro video, so I did a little bit on it. Yeah, it's really well written. I'm enjoying working on it. I think this is my first pattern of Melissa's that I've knit, but I've definitely have a bunch of hers in my favorites on Ravelry. So yeah, it's just so fun. And I think she wrote a book with Alicia Plummer. I think. I want to look at that. Gotta look into that. Yeah, because I love Alicia Plummer's designs as well. But yeah, first time doing a raglan. We will see how it goes. But yeah, I'm loving the yarn. Oh my goodness. And it's a superwash merino nylon, but it's not, and it's soft, but it's not a slick, silky soft. It is definitely soft to the touch, but it still feels like wool. I've used the same yarn for a shawl last year, and I loved it because it still feels like real wool, because that can be an issue with superwash, is that it just feels slicked down sometimes, or just super silky, which can be fine, and I like using that sometimes too, but this still definitely feels like it's actually wool. It still has a good grip like wool does, a little bit of a bounce to it, which I like. Plus, I forgot to mention, on the round, Rachel lives in Maine, so that's pretty cool. And speaking of Maine, it's living in my trundle bag for Madder Root. I don't have tons of like fancy project bags, and I don't really talk about them much, and I feel like I talk about this one all the time, but I just love it. But I have recently finally jumped onto the enamel pins bandwagon. For a while, it was the kind of thing that it looked like a lot of people picked up like at yarn festivals, and I've never really been to one, and so I didn't have any. But I had one from the Woolly Thistle that Claire had sent a while ago with one of her, with an order that I'd placed with her. And then this is the Betty's Sweater Pin, which was a collaboration between Ruth of Rain Cloud and Sage, and then, oh, I'm blanking on her name, over at Ink and Soil. She makes cards, she has an Etsy shop, it's beautiful. Oh, I'm sorry. But it's based on a pattern, like on a sweater that I believe that Ruth's grandmother had knit, and now they have tote bags, and I kind of want one. But yeah, so I bought one of those pins, and then I had seen somebody post about twill and print, and they're beautiful pins. So I had ordered one. I had ordered this one. It's like my favorite. Sip, Sip, Knit. It's a stack of little mugs. Sip, Sip, Knit. I love it. So I'd ordered that one, and they accidentally sent me little alpaca. And so I contacted them. I said, it's beautiful, but it's not the one I ordered. So they said I could keep this one, and then they sent me Sip, Sip, Knit as a replacement. And then they had a second sale, so I also snagged this one that says Yarnaholic, and then 2 skeins of yarn and a heart, and then this is a sweater with elbow patches that says Make, Wear, Mend. I've never really mended a lot of clothes, but it's the kind of thing that I want to learn how to do. So it's more of an aspirational pin rather than a this is what I actually do pin. And something that I really love about Twill and Print is at the back of their pins, it's not a metal backing on it, it's like a rubber, like it's this little rubber backing, which means that the yarn, if you put it on a yarn bag, it's not going to get snagged, which I like. And they are based out of Canada, so you do, if you're in the US, you do have to pay more shipping than you would for a company in the US, but it's worth it. I love their pins. And now I want all the pins. Okay. I recently cast off, again, I didn't bring them with me. I wasn't super prepared. I was just like, oh man, I gotta record, let's go. But I cast off a pair of socks. I had been using West Yorkshire spinners in the, I believe it's the blue tick colorway, to make a pair of blueberry waffle socks. And they're pretty short. I'd already used the yarn to make a pair of socks for my little sister, so I knit them toe up, which I've been doing more recently. I do like it. So I knit those 2 at a time, toe up to maximize yardage. So I just cast those off. I think it's just on Sunday. Today is Monday. No, I cast them off Saturday. And then I cast on another pair of socks, as one does. These are the Silver Birch socks by Rebecca of Naturally Knit Designs. And so I'm not very far. I just started the lacy stitch pattern across the top. I was craving something with a stitch pattern, something interesting that was not color work, but not cables. So I cast these on, and the yarn was really what inspired me to choose this particular pattern. The yarn is from Tuscan Knits. Oh my goodness, her yarn. All the hand-dyed yarn, but seriously, Maria of Tuscan Knits, her yarn is, all of her colorways are gorgeous. And she has some different bases. Like this one is 75% superwash blue-faced Leicester, 25% nylon, 460 yards to 100 grams. And the colorway is called Goldberry. It is perfection. I love it. It's kind of like this goldy green color, very Lord of the Rings-esque, which I love. But it's definitely brought to mind words like verdant and growing, and so I needed a pattern that had some sort of like leaf or flower motif or something that was plant-like. So that was when I decided to cast on silver birch. And this yarn is such a joy to work with. Again, talking about superwash yarns that don't feel silky smooth, like slicked down, this is definitely one of them. It still feels very woolly, and I like that it's a blue-faced Leicester, which is a different base. A lot of hand-dyed yarns are typically like a superwash merino, and Maria definitely has that, but I feel like these might hold up a little bit better being blue-faced Leicester. Not that I really know anything about sheep breeds, and I left my wool book inside, so I'm just making it up. You know how I said it's about learning as you go? Well, sometimes I just make things up. State it like a fact and everyone will believe you. It's fine. But yeah, it'll be cool to see how these wear being a different base. I thought about knitting something that wasn't socks with these, but I really was interested to see how this base would work up as a sock. And it's cool. It's like an olive green meets forest green meets a bar of gold. Like a little bit of gold to lighten it up. So yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And this pattern, it has a wider toe. You cast on 32 stitches and then increase up to 64. A lot of toe-up socks I've done, you started with like 16 stitches, but I think that's cool. Like you do that, so the increases end here, and then you do a few rows of plain stockinette before you start the stitch pattern. So, and that's just fun. I'm knitting these Magic Loop. These are Haya Sharps, size 1.5. I kind of wanted to knit these on DPNs, but the pattern called for size 1.5, and I don't have 1.5s in DPNs. And the tips are very sharp, which is good for lace. And sometimes when you're doing a motif, like a stitch pattern across the foot, it's nice to have all those stitches on one needle. So Magic Loop works for that. I'm not totally on one side or the other for DPNs versus Magic Loop. I really like both. I do like that Magic Loop allows me to buy circular needles and then use those for large or small projects in the round. But I also really like using DPNs, especially for color work. I have my Alieska by Caitlin Hunter on the needles, and doing color work, I'm Magic Looping the sleeves, and doing color work Magic Loop is not my friend. I don't like it. I just feel like it's hard to get the floats even across where the needles join. It's just hard. But when you're knitting with DPNs, your knitting is always open. With Magic Loop, like it's flat, but when you have DPNs, it's open, so it's easier to get the floats and things like that even around, at least in my experience. I learned to knit in the round on DPNs, so that's what comes naturally to me. But I do really like Magic Loop. So yeah, just make sure your cable's long enough. The first time I tried Magic Loop, it was with a small cable, and I was like, oh no, I hate this. But then I finally tried again with a bigger cable, and it worked a lot better. So just give yourself that extra room to pull your needles through and to play around with. And I've used these, the past 2 pairs of socks I've made, I actually knit 2 at a time, which is new for me. But I do like that when I'm done, I'm done. I've completed both. But for this, where it was a more complicated stitch pattern, I just wanted to focus on 1 sock at a time. And for toe up, I've done that the last couple pairs of socks because I've been using not a full skein of yarn, so I want to maximize yardage. But in this case, I can just weigh it. I'll weigh it when it's, as I get towards working on the leg, and when it's about halfway done, then I can stop and start the other sock. Because I definitely want to maximize this yarn. It's beautiful. So that is my sock project. My last work in progress. I just looked at my iced tea. And for a second I thought there was a spider in it, but no, it's just the pine needles that were stuck to the bottom of it. It's in a glass jar, so. Oh, podcasting outdoors. I love it. Anyway, my last project on the needles. It's a little yarn coming everywhere and got like 3 needles on here. It's a little crazy right now. But it is my Alyeska by Caitlin Hunter. And I'm calling this, I haven't come up with names for some of my other projects. But I am calling this my Secret Garden sweater. Because when I was looking at the colors, they definitely reminded me of like Victorian, like a Victorian tea party in a garden, like a garden party was what it brought to mind, which then made me start thinking about all the books I loved as a kid that were set in Victorian times, and that made me think of The Secret Garden. And I love this quote from The Secret Garden. It says, "And the secret garden bloomed and bloomed, and every morning revealed new miracles." So I'm kind of calling this my Secret Garden Bloomed sweater. So I have completed the body. And I actually had to stop the ribbing a little short. I ran out of this brown yarn. So I stopped the ribbing, I bound off. I did a sewn bind off. I think it's Elizabeth Zimmerman. I think it's Elizabeth Zimmerman's sewn bind off. I used a tutorial from Pearl Soho. And so then I debated. Run out of the yarn. And on the top of the sleeves, you're supposed to repeat this color work here. I couldn't. But then I was wondering, do I do a short sleeve sweater? Do I do 3/4 length, like get to the end of this color work section and then do the ribbing and bind off the sleeves? Or do I continue the third color all the way down, which obviously is what I decided on. I did play around with the short sleeved option, but the next Caitlin Hunter sweater I want to cast on will be short sleeved. So I was like, I really want this to be long sleeves. So I just skipped the color work right here, did this color work, and then I have just continued knitting this, counted my rows, so I knew how many it was, 80, saying this now in case I forget, it's 80 rows after this color work chart. And I kept trying it on, and then I did ribbing, and right now I have the stitches arranged to do another sewn bind off on here. But basically to do that, you separate the knits and the purls, and you put them in 2 separate stitches, and then you graft the knits and the purls together like you would the toe of a sock. So there are 2 needles, and I've started the second sleeve. So, if you remember last time, I was talking about casting this on, and I was trying to decide what color to use up here. I did a swatch with all 3 colors, and I left it inside. Again, I'm a little out of practice. So, I had a bright blue mohair, I had a light green Quince & Co. Finch, and I had this Knit Picks alpaca, this teal color. And literally everyone commented on my last video, said like teal and capital letters with exclamation marks. And that was kind of what I was leaning towards too, especially after I swatched. So I ended up going with the teal, and I am so glad I did. I feel like, because at first I wasn't sure about one of the other ones, because in the original pattern photos, it's like a bright pop of color. Like it's neutrals and then it's orange right here. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go with the blue mohair, because it would be more of a contrast. But like I was saying earlier, something I love about Caitlin Hunter's patterns is that you can go for low contrast, and it still looks really good with the color work. So I love, love, love this teal. It's Knit Picks. I think it's 100% baby alpaca. I don't remember if there's a special name for it. Fingering weight. Yeah, I'm in love. It used hardly any of the yarn. I did consider, in my sleeve options, I did consider using that down here in this color work section, but then I decided against it. I wanted it to stay just up at the top. This yarn, this top color number 1, is Sweet Sparrow Yarns. don't remember the base, but it is her pajama day colorway. This section is 6 and 7 fiber. I don't remember the colorway name. This third color is Once Upon a Corgi in the Nose Stuck in a Book colorway, and it's a tweed base. And then the brown is Fibrarium yarns, and I don't think there was a colorway name for that. One thing that I loved is how the speckles turned out, because it was this 6 and 7 fiber that I used, which has a lot of color variation. It goes from cream to kind of a yellowy to pinky to a purple. And so the speckles turned out really fun. They're all different colors because of that. I know this is technically called lice stitch, but that just does not sound good. So I'm calling them little speckles. Oh my goodness, I love this sweater. Every time I try it on, I just wish it was cool enough to wear it all day. It is soft, it is warm, it is cozy, it is just the perfect amount of oversized. I am knitting the large size, just because I wanted to make sure I had lots of positive ease with this. It'll be a nice cozy winter sweater. So yeah, so this is the large, but my gauge was a little bit on the smaller side. So I figured I'd go with the large and a slightly smaller gauge. I'd end up somewhere around a medium, maybe a little bit between a medium and a large. And that's kind of what it's working up as. Again, fun color work, it keeps you engaged. And something I love about this is that it's such a great stash buster. Like, I didn't need to buy 4 skeins of hand-dyed yarns to make this, which, as much as I love hand-dyed yarns, I cannot afford to drop enough money to get a sweater's quantity all at once. But I love that I kind of like gradually collected these. Like, I think I had this yarn and this yarn purchased separately at separate times, and then I slowly started to think, like, when the fade craze came in, I was like, well, maybe I can make a faded sweater. And then so then I got this brown yarn, and then I bought this pajama day colorway, and then I ended up, like I talked about last time, I didn't want to knit a plain stockinette stitch fingering weight sweater. So I'm so glad that I decided on the Alyeska. I'm sure a faded sweater would have been gorgeous, but I'm in love with this. And this also is nice because these colors don't really fade into each other super well. Like, it's not a gradual fade, which is what I would like if I was knitting a faded sweater, but in a colorwork pattern like this, it works. So I am in love with this sweater. I think that is everything I have to talk about. Oh, and it still will leave me with a lot of yarn. I ran out of the brown, but I still have like this much left, like half a skein of this. I still have all of this of the 6 and 7 fiber, and I still have this much left of the Once Upon a Corgi, and I'm using this, and I've already completed a sleeve. So I'd have to figure out something to use the 3 of these together. I think that is everything. So until I see you next time, which, you know, who knows when that will be. Until I see you next time, I hope that you are making time to create, even if it's hot, even if it's hard. I hope that you're finding that little space of time to create, and that you are full of curiosity and willing to learn, and being okay if you do make a mistake, like I do a lot. So for now, goodbye from beautiful outside in Maine, and I hope that, yeah, I never know how to end. So until I see you next time, bye.
I told you I was on your side. I told you I would never hide.